Welcome to a new episode from English Plus Podcast, and today's episode we're going to get back to what many of you requested, and that is grammar. And if you remember well, my philosophy in grammar is not just about learning the rules or learning the differences between expressions, but rather knowing when to use these things and how to use these things, because grammar without purpose is actually nothing. Grammar is supposed to be a tool to help you express yourself better, and even more than that, to help you express yourself more precisely, to say exactly what you want to say. And that is what we're going to continue on doing, and we're getting back to our grammar series, and we're going to start talking about modal verbs. And specifically, in today's episode, we're going to talk about can, could, and be able to. Now, for those of you who might wonder, why don't we start with the tenses? Well, we've actually done that, and we have an entire series dedicated to learning the English tenses. You can find it on the website. I will leave a link to it in the post on Patreon if you're listening to this episode on Patreon. But if you're on the website, you can head directly to the audio series and you will find Learning the English Tenses, one of the audio series available on the website. So today we have a new premium episode, and we're going to talk about modal verbs. Specifically, we're going to talk about can, could, and be able to. Now, let me remind you that you can practice every single thing we're going to talk about in today's episode on the website. I will leave a link to the custom post I created for this episode, and then cement the knowledge that you're going to learn in today's episode by doing the exercises. Maybe not right away. Maybe you want to wait a day or two so that when you come back to do the exercises, you will have forgotten some of the information, and that will be a great way to review the information and remember what we're going to talk about in today's episode. That'll be great for your learning. But anyway, let's not waste any more time, and let's start talking about can, could, and be able to. So let's start with can. Now, what do we use can for? We use can to say that something is possible or allowed, or that somebody has the ability to do something. And of course, we use can with infinitive, so we say can do, not can does, or can doing, or can did, etc. We use an infinitive verb after can. Let me give you a couple of examples. We can see the lake from our hotel. That is something possible. We have the ability to do that, or it is possible to do that. Can you speak any foreign languages? Now here, I'm asking about your ability to speak any foreign languages. Can you speak any foreign languages? Maybe yes, maybe no. Or we can say the word dream can be a noun or a verb. So here we're not talking about the ability, but the possibility of this word dream to be a noun or a verb. So think about can not only in terms of ability, but also possibility and what is allowed. And of course, since we can use can in affirmative, we can also use it in negative. For example, we can say, I'm afraid I can't come to the party on Friday. I can't come, I cannot come to the party on Friday. And here maybe we just mean to say it is not possible for me. I'm not talking about the ability. It's not just that I am unable to come. I don't have the ability to come. Here we're talking about it's not possible because maybe I have something else, maybe I'm busy, maybe whatever. You have a reason why you can't come to the party on Friday. And here, before we move on and start talking about able to, let me tell you something that has to do with the pronunciation of can and can't. Well, it might be tempting for you to say can. I can do that. Well, unless you're stressing the fact that you can do something, we usually say can as a short kin, not can. I can do this. I can do that. Not I can do that. Because when you say can, people will misunderstand and will think that you're saying can't. Because usually when people pronounce can't in negative, they just simply use the can. I can't go there. I can't. Even the T is not very well enunciated here. So when you have a can, usually it means negative. I'm talking about pronunciation here, of course. And when you want to use can in affirmative, you simply go for I can do that. I can, not I can do that. I can do that, that means I can't. It is important because sometimes it might be misleading when you want to pronounce can in positive or negative. But now, that being said, let's move on to the next point and let's talk about be able to. When do we use that? Well, you can simply say that somebody is able to do something, but can is more usual. Now, we can say, for example, we are able to see the lake from our hotel, but it is more natural to say we can see the lake from our hotel. But we will have to say that this is a possibility. But then you're going to ask me, then why are we learning about be able to in the first place if we can use can instead of it, and can is more usual? And you'll be right to think so. But the problem with can, that it has only two forms. It has can, which is the present form, and could, which is the past form. So sometimes it is necessary to use be able to. Grammatically speaking, it is necessary. For example, yes, you can say I can't sleep, but what if you want to use the present perfect? What if you want to say I haven't? You can't use I haven't can sleep or I haven't could. This is impossible grammatically. So if you want to use the present perfect, you will have to use be able to, because that's the only way. You will go like I haven't been able to sleep recently. So that is something useful for be able to, and that is a reason why we are discussing it in today's episode. Let me give you another example. Tom can come tomorrow. Well, that's possible. That's good. Of course, we can say Tom is able to come tomorrow, but we already said that can is more natural, is more usual. So here, why would we even want to use be able to? Well, maybe it's not about Tom can come tomorrow. This is not what you want to say. Maybe you want to say Tom might. Now, of course, you can simply say Tom might come tomorrow, and we will talk about may and might later down the line, because might is another modal verb, of course. But the point here, what if you want to mix them together? What if you want to say Tom might can? Of course, you can't do that, because can only has two forms. It doesn't have a zero form. It doesn't have an infinitive form. So here, be able comes in handy. Tom might be able to come tomorrow. So there's another one. And let me give you one more example. Let's say, for example, Maria can speak French, Spanish, and English. And that's completely fine. Of course, again, we can say Maria is able to speak French, but I wouldn't advise you to do that. Use can. It's simple, it's better, it's more usual, more natural. But what if you want to use it after must? For example, applicants for the job must, and here I want to use something after must that has to do with ability. That means ability. So I can't say must can speak two foreign languages. That's impossible grammatically, because remember, can doesn't have an infinitive form, just a present and a past form. But here we can use be able to. We can say applicants for the job must be able to speak two foreign languages. So there's another good use for be able to. Now, of course, later in this episode, we will talk a little bit more about be able to and can, and when we usually use be able to and not can, and can instead of be able to, and be able to instead of can or could. But I will leave that till the end of the episode, when we are going to talk about some advanced features of can, could, and be able to. But for now, this is all you need to know about be able to. When to use it, how we can use it, when it is necessary to use it. That's the important thing. Remember, why are we even learning about this whole thing? We are learning about can, could, and be able to learn how to talk about ability, possibility, and some more meanings are coming along. So next, we're going to start talking about could, so don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. So what about could? Well, sometimes could is simply the past of can. And we use could especially with see, hear, smell, taste, feel, remember, understand. For example, we can say, we had a lovely room in the hotel. Now here, pay attention, we're talking about this in the past. We had a lovely room in the hotel. We could see the lake. It's simply like saying we can see the lake, but we're talking about this in the past, so could is possible. Could is sometimes simply the past of can. Another example. As soon as I walked into the room, I could smell gas. This is exactly the meaning of can, but it's simply in the past. Or, I was sitting at the back of the theater and couldn't hear very well. Didn't have the ability to hear very well. But so it's in the past. We can't use can in the past. It doesn't make any sense. We can use could for the past. But this is not everything about could. Could is very versatile. We also use could to say that somebody had the ability to do something, or was allowed to do something, or something was possible for this person to do. For example, we can say, my grandfather could speak 5 languages. My grandfather had the ability to speak 5 languages. Or we were totally free. We could do what we wanted. We had the possibility to do that. We were allowed to do that. We could do what we wanted. Here, it's not about the ability. It's about that we were allowed to do that. So that is the very simple and very straightforward use of could. But there's more, of course. And we will talk about more in this episode. But first, let's compare the use of could and was able to. Because we know that be able to is much more flexible than can or could because it can be, the be part, the verb to be, can be anything you want. It can be present, past, past participle. We can use it in any form we want. So we can simply say was able to. And was able to would have the same meaning of could because it's in the past. And that is true, obviously. But we don't use was able to all the time. We use could for general ability and with see, hear, etc. For example, my grandfather could speak 5 languages. That is a general ability he had. Or I could see them, but not very clearly. Also remember that we usually use could when we have the verb as see, hear, smell, taste, feel, remember, or understand. But sometimes we want to talk about a specific situation. To say that somebody succeeded in doing something in a specific situation. And when we want to say that, when we want to have this meaning conveyed to people, we normally use was or were able to instead of could. And actually here we can even use managed to. I'll give you an example. The fire spread quickly, but everybody was able to escape. We don't usually say could escape here, because here we're not talking about general ability. We're talking about a very specific situation. In that very specific situation, everybody was able to escape, not could escape. Let me give you another example, and I will use managed to here, because it can be used here instead of was able to if you want. I didn't know where Max was, but I managed to find him in the end. So here, it's not that I'm talking about my general ability to find Max. It's not a general ability. It's not like I'm the professional person that can find Max anytime you want. No, I'm talking about a specific situation in the past. I didn't know where Max was, but I managed to find him in the end. Now, to understand this even more, let's make a simple comparison between a context with some general ability and another context with some ability in a very specific situation. Let's say, for example, Jack was an excellent tennis player when he was younger. So we're talking about Jack, and obviously we're talking about his general ability in the past. He could beat anybody. And here, we're not talking about a specific game or a specific opponent or a specific day. We are talking about his general ability because obviously he was good enough to beat anybody. He had the ability to do that. He had this general ability because he was a very good tennis player to beat everybody. So we can simply use could here. He could beat anybody. But what if I want to use the same Jack but in a specific situation? Jack and Andy played a match yesterday. So, see, it's specific. Andy played well, but Jack was able to beat him, or Jack managed to beat him. Both are fine. So here, we don't usually use could in this case because we're not talking about Jack's general ability to beat Andy. We're talking about a very specific situation that happened yesterday. Jack and Andy played a match yesterday. Andy played well, but Jack was able to beat him, or as I said, Jack managed to beat him. Both are possible. So here, I'm simply saying he succeeded. Jack succeeded in beating him this time. Maybe it doesn't happen every time. Who knows? I'm not talking about his general ability. So remember that very well. While that applies to could and be able to or was able to, were able to, in affirmative, it doesn't apply in negative because the negative couldn't or could not is possible in all situations. I'm not saying that was not able to is wrong here or didn't manage to is wrong. No, they're fine. But the point is, we always tend to use the easier option, right? We don't want to complicate things. And could not or couldn't, which is the negative form of could, can be used or is possible in all situations, whether we're talking about general ability stuff or we're talking about specific situations. I'll give you a couple of examples. My grandfather couldn't swim. Now, here, we're talking about general ability, and we already said that with general ability, we usually use could. So we said couldn't swim. But what if I want to talk about the same instance with Max? I looked for Max everywhere, but I couldn't find him. that is specific. When we say I wasn't able to find him, well, you can. You can say I wasn't able to find him or I didn't manage to find him, that's fine. But guess what? Couldn't is possible here. Couldn't is possible actually in all situations. So you don't have to worry if you want to use could in negative. And like the example with Andy, we can say Andy played well, but he couldn't beat Jack. All right? He couldn't beat Jack. That's possible. So that is about can, could, and be able to, but that's not everything. That's just the beginning. We're going to talk next about could do and could have done and the difference between these two. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Now, as we said, sometimes could is the past of can. Like when we say, listen, I can hear something, that is for now, or I listened, I could hear something, that's in the past. And we already established this fact. But could is not always past. We also use could for possible actions now or in the future, especially to make suggestions. For example, let's say that somebody asks you, what shall we do tonight? You can answer and say, we could go to the cinema. We could go to the movies. We could, that is for the present or the future. So we can use could for possible actions now or in the future. It is not always the past of can. It can be the past of can, but it's not always the past of can. Let me give you another example. When you go to Paris next month, you could stay with Sarah. Maybe somebody is telling me that. You could stay with Sarah next month. You see? We're not talking about it in the past when you went to Paris last month. You could stay with Sarah. That's something else, and we'll get to that. That is actually the part where could have is used. But let's stick to this point now. Let's say somebody tells me this, when you go to Paris next month, you could stay with Sarah. And here, I may answer, well, yeah, I suppose I could. Next month. That's the future. And here you might be wondering, why don't we use can for these situations? Now, for the first example, when I told you what shall we do tonight, and the answer was we could go to the cinema, why can't we say we can go to the cinema? Can. We use can instead of could here. Well, actually, we can. We can do that. So can is also possible in these sentences. We can simply say, as I said, we can go to the cinema instead of we could go to the cinema. But there's one very small difference between them. Could is less sure than can. Now, if you say to somebody, we could go to the cinema, you're not quite sure about that. You're just suggesting a possibility, but it's not as sure as can. If you say we can go to the cinema, that's a little bit more sure than could. That's the only difference. But it shouldn't pose a problem for you, I guess. But my job here is just to let you know the slight difference between these two. Because, again, why are we learning these slight differences in grammar? It's not just to be able to do the exercises that you can find on the website, by the way, as I told you at the beginning of the episode. It's not about acing an exam or something. Well, that can be good, of course. If these episodes help you perform better in grammar exams, I'll be happy that I've helped. But the main target, the main purpose, I'm doing all this is to help you convey specific meanings you have in mind. If you want to say something, sometimes it's not just the words that you need, but the structure that can make all the difference. So you learn these nuances, the differences between this structure and the next, between this grammatical structure and that, to be able to express yourself better or more clearly or more specifically if you want. All right? And since I'm telling you about the difference between can and could, let me tell you about one more thing. We use could, not can, for actions that are not realistic. For example, I'm so tired, I could sleep for a week. Well, this is not the past, right? I'm not talking about something in the past. I'm tired right now, and I'm telling you that I could sleep for a week. Well, obviously, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, don't you think? But we use it all the time. It's possible, it's okay to use. We say that all the time. I could sleep for a week because I'm so tired. But am I going to sleep for a week, even if I had the chance to do that? Of course not. We're not talking about realistic things here. And when we're not talking about realistic things, we use could, not can. Now here, it would be a mistake to say, I can sleep for a week, because when you say, I can sleep for a week, you actually mean it. It's realistic. You really want to sleep for a week. Now, if you want to sleep for a week, go ahead and use can. But if you're just using it figuratively, like, for example, I'm so hungry, I could eat a horse. That's a very common expression. I could eat a horse. Well, obviously, you're not going to eat a horse. Now, obviously, you don't have the ability to do that in the first place. And of course, you don't mean to do that, but you're just talking about something unrealistic. And that's when you use could instead of can. Now let me give you a couple of more examples, and we will see the difference between can and could. For example, I can stay with Sarah when I go to Paris. I can stay with Sarah. That's possible. That's realistic. So I use can instead of could. And here, you might say, but we can use could if I want, right? You just told us about that. That's right. But there's another layer of meaning you can add to your sentence or to what you say just by simply using can or could. So think about these differences as weapons in your speaking and writing. That's the real stuff. In good writing and good speaking, that's when we say that a person speaks very well or writes very well because this person knows those nuances and uses them to perfection. And by the way, by mastering these techniques, these grammar techniques, you will be able to say a lot more with far fewer words. That's the main thing you can learn from grammar. It can really help you say whatever you want with much fewer words. But anyway, let's continue some other examples. And he's still talking about this trip to Paris, and I may go like, maybe I could stay with Sarah when I go to Paris. Now here, of course it's possible, but it's less sure. So if you want to mean that, you might want to use could. And we go from realistic to possible and less sure to the unrealistic. For example, this is a wonderful place. I could stay here forever. Now, of course, when you say I could stay here forever, you don't mean that literally. It's kind of figuratively speaking. So here I could stay here forever, that's kind of unrealistic, right? And that's why we use could. If you say I can stay here forever, you really mean it. Do you really mean that? Well, if you mean it, just use can if you want. But, of course, usually like 99% of the times when you say things like that, it's kind of unrealistic. You don't really mean that. You're just saying it to simply say that this is a wonderful place. I could stay here forever. And that's not everything. Before we move to could have, let me tell you about one more difference between could and can. We also use could, not can, to say that something is possible now or in the future. For example, if we say the story could be true, but I don't think it is. I'm not talking about ability, I'm talking just about a possibility here. I'm just talking about something that is possible, 50-50. So here, could is the word to use, or could is the modal verb to use, not can. Or, I don't know what time Lisa is coming. She could get here at any time. It's possible. Something that is possible now or in the future. Let's compare can and could in this sense. The weather can change very quickly in the mountains. Well, this is not about a specific possibility in the present or in the future. I'm talking about this in general, all right? But if I want to talk about the weather now and not in general, I would want to use could. I can say, for example, the weather is nice now, but it could change later. It can change. You're talking about the general ability of this weather, not specifically, not right now. So I hope that all makes sense to you. And again, think about these things as weapons in your arsenal, in your writing and speaking arsenal. Don't think about them as boring grammar that we don't want to learn about. No, this is something that will help you say a lot more with fewer words. This is something that will help you express yourself a lot better. And next, we're going to talk about could have. That's coming next, so don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Now, we use could have with the past participle, by the way. We don't say could have do. We have to say could have done. This is used to talk about the past. Now, compare how we use could for now or for the past. For example, I'm so tired, I could sleep for a week. We already talked about that, right? And when we say that, we're talking about right now. But what if I say, I was so tired? Is it okay to use I could sleep for a week again? But the whole sentence is in the past. So here, we could say, I could have slept for a week. So that's the difference between the specific use of could in the present or in the past. Let me give you another example to make the idea even clearer in your mind. The situation is bad, but it could be worse. So here we're talking about something that could possibly happen in the future, right? So we can use could. But the situation is bad. We're talking about now. But what if we want to talk about the very same example in the past? What if you want to say the situation was bad? Can I still use could be worse? Not really. We have to say, but it could have been worse. It could have been worse. And when we talk about something that could have happened, that simply means it was possible, but it didn't happen. And we use that a lot. Like could have been worse. It could have been worse, but it wasn't. I could have slept for a week, but of course I didn't. And here, remember, we're talking about unrealistic things in the first example. But what if we're talking about something else that is realistic, but we're talking about something that was possible but didn't happen? We can use could have happened. For example, why did you stay at a hotel? You could have stayed with me. But did you? No, that was possible, but you didn't stay with me. Or another example. David was lucky. He could have hurt himself when he fell, but he's all right. So he fell and he could have hurt himself. So the question is, did he hurt himself? No, it didn't happen. When we use could have happened, something could have happened, that means it was possible, but it didn't happen. And finally, before I move on to talk about some advanced stuff that some of you might like, and to be honest, maybe that's my favorite part because there is the real nuances and the differences in meaning, let's talk about one more expression with could and what it really means, and that is I couldn't do something. Now, of course, you can use I couldn't do something for all the reasons I mentioned earlier in the episode, but you can use I couldn't do something to mean it would not be possible. Let me give you a couple of examples so that you understand this more. I couldn't live in a big city. I'd hate it. It wouldn't be possible for me. And obviously because I don't like living in a city. So I couldn't live in a big city. That means it would not be possible for me. Another example. Everything is fine right now. Things couldn't be better. Things couldn't be better, that wouldn't be possible. And this is a common expression, by the way. It couldn't be better to say that things are great. And if we want to use that in the past, of course, we use couldn't have. That means would not have been possible. So it's simple now because you know that we can simply add have and the past participle of a verb after have to have this meaning. So for example, we say, we had a really good holiday. It couldn't have been better. It couldn't have been better. Instead of couldn't be better, because that's the present version of this expression, we can use it couldn't have been better. It couldn't have been better. And finally, just let me remind you that couldn't do something has actually two meanings. Remember always that those modal verbs are kind of not complicated, but versatile. They have many different meanings. They can be used in different meanings in different contexts. And couldn't do is not an exception. When you say I couldn't do something, you may have two meanings for that. Couldn't can mean it would not be possible now, or I would not be able to. Like I couldn't run 10 kilometers now. I'm not fit enough. That means I would not be able to. Or it can be I was not able in the past. Like I couldn't run yesterday because I'd hurt my leg. So I was not able to do that. Because remember, we said couldn't can be used for both specific situations or general ability. So just keep all these meanings in mind and you will be able to express yourself a lot better in the future. And remember, if you really want to remember all the stuff that I talked about, there's a good way. You can do the exercises. They're right there waiting for you on the website. If you're already on the website, that's fine. They're just below the audio episode. But if you're listening to that on Patreon, just take the link you can find in the body of the post and go to the website. But remember, you will have to sign in on the website using your Patreon credentials to be able to unlock this piece of content on the website because it is locked and it is available only to my patrons, to you. So before we wrap up today's discussion about can, could, and be able to, we will talk about some advanced nuances that are related to can, could, and be able to. That's coming next. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. So, let's talk about advanced stuff, right? Let's start with can, could, and be able to when we use them to talk about ability. Now, I said that we sometimes use be able to instead of can and could to talk about ability. But we avoid be able to when we talk about something that is happening as we speak. For example, let's say your little girl is telling you, watch me, mom, I can stand on one leg. This thing is happening at the moment of speaking. We avoid using be able to. Now here you wouldn't naturally hear, I'm able to stand on one leg. I can stand on one leg. Watch me, mom, watch me, dad, etc. I can stand on one leg. Or avoid using be able to before passives. Here we say, for example, films can now easily be streamed online. Now here, avoid using be able to. Don't say films are now easily able to be streamed online. That would be kind of awkward. And finally, avoid using be able to when the meaning is know how to. When you want to use can to say I know how to. Or you want to ask someone, obviously. So for example, when you ask someone, can you cook? You would say, can you cook? Not, are you able to cook? Are you able to cook is kind of weird. We don't ask that when we mean by using can, do you know how to? Not, are you able to? Okay, so here we say, can you cook? And of course, that's not everything. There's more. When we come to advanced, there's a lot of nuances. And maybe at this point you're saying that this is a little bit too much for you, but trust me, these little nuances are very, very important to take your English to the very next level. Maybe the level that you thought you would never get, but you will. If you listen to me, if you listen to these nuances, you will know a lot of differences that will make your English a lot better. So let's continue and let's talk about some other differences. Now, if we talk about a single achievement rather than a general ability in the past, we usually use be able to rather than could. Remember? We said Sophie could play the flute quite well, or was able to if you want, of course, because this is general ability. But when we want to be specific, when we say she swam strongly and was able to cross the river easily even though it was swollen by the heavy rain, here, because it is a specific achievement or a specific situation, we don't use could. But remember that could is usually more natural than be able to in negative sentences. I tried to get up but I couldn't move. And also remember that could is more natural with verbs of the senses like feel, hear, see, smell, or taste, and with verbs of thinking like believe, decide, remember, and understand. So I say I could remember the crash, but nothing after that. Not I was able to. All right? Remember, with these specific verbs, could is more natural. And also, after the phrases the only thing or the only place or the only time, and after all when it means the only thing. For example, all we could see were his feet. Now here, we don't usually say all we were able to see, all right? Even this one, you would say it is a specific situation, I know, but we don't use be able to in this situation. One more thing, when could is usually more natural than be able to, is when you want to use it to suggest that something almost didn't happen, particularly with almost, hardly, just, and nearly. For example, I could nearly touch the ceiling. Not I was nearly able to touch the ceiling, that would not be natural. So that was about can, could, and be able to when the meaning has to do with ability. Now what about can and could to talk about possibility? That is coming next. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. Now, to talk about the theoretical possibility of something happening, we use could, not can. However, we use can, not could, to say that something is possible and actually happens. For example, it could be expensive to keep a cat. The meaning here is that if we had one, it could or it may not be expensive. Compare this to saying it can be expensive to keep a cat. Here the meaning is that it can be and it sometimes is. So remember, could is not as sure as can. So if you want to have this little difference between saying it could be expensive to keep a cat or it can be expensive to keep a cat, you can see that can is much more affirmative than could. Now what about can't and couldn't? We use can't, not couldn't, to say that something is theoretically or actually impossible. For example, there can't be many people in the world who haven't watched television. There can't be. This is something theoretically impossible. And in this situation, we don't use couldn't. We don't say there couldn't be many people in the world. No, there can't be. I'm saying that this is theoretically or actually impossible. And finally, we use can to indicate that there is a very real possibility of a future event happening. And I will have to stress this again and again. And here I know it's a little bit more advanced, yeah, but it's the same idea. So if you notice that even when we talk about some more advanced grammar, the main ideas, the basic ideas are just the same. So if you have the fundamentals, you don't have to worry about anything. Don't take grammar as mechanics. Don't try to learn grammar as just the mechanics of grammar. This comes after that, whatever. Always try to understand the meanings, those differences in the meaning. That's what's going to take your English to the next level. So remember that we use can to indicate that there's a very real possibility of a future event happening. Using could suggests that something is less likely or that there is some doubt about it. For example, when you say, we can stay with Jake in Oslo, that means we will be able to stay. That's fine. It's possible. But if you're not sure about that, you can use could. You can say, we could stay with Jake in Oslo. Now here, it doesn't mean that you don't want to. You're still saying that this is possible, but there might be something that will make this thing impossible. Maybe he's not there at the time we travel. Maybe he doesn't want us to stay with him. I don't know. I haven't asked him. I mean, I'm assuming that he would say yes, but what if he says no? Or what if we don't go to Oslo in the first place? So here, when you have doubts, when whatever the reason of the doubt is, you use could instead of can. All right? Now we come to the very, very last point, and I promise this time it is the last point of this episode. I'm not going to talk more about grammar for one day. That's enough grammar for one day, but there's one more point I would like to talk about that has to do with could and be allowed to talk about permission. That's coming next. Don't go anywhere. So our final point for today's episode, could and be allowed to talk about permission. Now, to say that in the past someone had general permission to do something, that is, to do it at any time, we can use either could or was or were allowed to. However, to talk about permission for one particular past action, you use was or were allowed to, but not could. For example, anyone was allowed to fish in the lake when the council owned it. Or you could say could fish, that's fine, no problem, because we're talking about general permission. But what if we want to say, although he didn't have a ticket, Ned was allowed to come in? That is specific. That is a specific permission. It is not general permission. So here, was allowed to is used, but not could. It's just the same when we talked about was able to. So that will tell you something about grammar, that things kind of repeat in different contexts. And when you really understand the heart of grammar, you'll be able to transfer this knowledge to other examples and other words and other structures, like this one. And since we said that, you wouldn't be surprised when I tell you that in negative sentences, we can use either couldn't or wasn't or weren't allowed to say that permission was not given in general or particular situations, just like was not able to or were not able to and couldn't. For example, you can say, I couldn't open the present until my birthday, or I wasn't allowed to open the present until my birthday, and both of them are fine. And with that, I'm very happy to tell you that this is everything I want to share with you in today's episode. I hope you like our new grammar and speaking episodes. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for listening. This is your host, Danny. I will see you next time.